Bonjour, Anishinaabe Naawegiizhiigokwe indigo. Magazine in Dudame, Papashka Metagung in Dunjaba, Guaba Igning in the Heartberry in Dananoki. My English name is Sarah Agaton Howes. Naawegiizhiigokwe is my Anishinaabe name. And I'm Eagle Clan, and I'm from Cloquet, Fond du Lac, but I live in Sawyer, and I work for Heartberry. And Heartberry is my business. I have a business where I do contemporary Ojibwe design and also teach cultural art classes and do custom art for like tribes and organizations. And basically I get to be an artist for a job, which is really cool and crazy and something that I never thought I would be doing in a million years. And so that's what I do. And I'm in my little HQ here out in the res. And there's guys out working in my yard, and my kids are in homeschool inside the house. And so we're doing all the things at one time. But I'm glad to be here, and Miigwech for having me here to talk to you today. I grew up on Reservation Road, actually. That's not a metaphor. I actually grew up, and that's not me being like overly Indigenous. The road is actually called Reservation Road in Cloquet, in my great grandma's house. And the way that I grew up was like, we grew up going to Christian school, going to church. My dad was a police officer. And so he was one of the few men I knew who had like a year-round job. Back then, this was like the early 80s, right? So there was not a lot of work. And the way that I grew up was always, the message was to go to school and get off the res, like get away from here. And that's the best way you're going to be successful. Assimilate, learn as much as you can. And that was the message that I got really early on. And like, I didn't grow up like knowing about ceremonies or language. But I grew up in this house that was my great grandma's, and she was the last, like one of the last Ojibwe language speakers in our family. And our house that we grew up in, they used to have all these meetings and dances and stuff in it. So there was always something about the place where we grew up that always made me be like, but there's something else about this place. There's something more to being. And when we were younger, we called ourselves Indian, right? So there's something more to being Indian than just a word or just the addiction that's around me. There's something more to being Indian than the res. Like there's something more to it. And I didn't really know what that was until I was quite a bit older. And I remember when I was 16, I went to my first powwow. And I remember walking around that powwow being like, all these people are doing this all this time and no one brought me here, and feeling so betrayed. That my family didn't raise me like that. But my dad was the product of 3 generations of the Catholic boarding school experience. And so his way of thinking was, you know, you got to just go to school, get a good job, you know, like take care of your family. And he wasn't thinking about like all these things that we had that he had to leave behind, that my grandma had to leave behind. And so that experience was really pivotal for me, because I remember being like, I want to, you know how you go to a powwow and you walk around the outside of the circle and you walk around and you walk around. And if you're young people, you know what I mean? You really walk around. And I remember walking around thinking, I want to be in this. I don't want to be around it. I don't want to be about it. I want to be it. I want to be in it. And that really changed the whole trajectory of my life. That I was just like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find a way to be in it. And yeah, it changed a lot in college, going to college, and the kind of things that my teachers taught me, learning about the boarding schools, learning about language, learning about our history, really changed the way that I thought about myself. And I thought about the people I grew up around and the trauma and the sadness and the hardship I grew up around, where I was always like, man, what happened to us? And then when I learned our history, I was like, oh, that's what happened to us. So much happened. And so really getting to understand that helped to change the way that I thought about our community.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk, like, do you mind talking a little bit more about, like, I have a couple of things that, from what you said. I'm thinking about how you were talking about, like you were growing up on the res, like, you know, you're Indian, right? That's what you guys referred to yourself as Indian. But then you also, were you feeling like separate from your culture at that time? Like, despite having these, like your grandma having meetings in your home and you have language around you, but you were feeling sort of separate from that? Like, can you talk about that a little more? Like, is that how you were feeling? Sorry.
No, go ahead. That's good. So I obviously, like, I'm a light-skinned, like, Native woman, right? So there's that part that my mom is white, my dad is Native. So I always grew up feeling like I wasn't enough of anything. So I'm not enough Indian. Like, I don't look the part, and I'm not white, because when I go to town, they make sure and let me know that I'm not white either. And I never felt like I was enough of either thing. And that was part, though, of being Indian. And I think for me, learning that I'm not Indian, I'm Anishinaabe. And what Anishinaabe is about my humanness. And in being Anishinaabe is not a race. Being Anishinaabe is like this part of me, right? And so, like, if I can step away from what's my blood quantum, or what's my how dark am I, or how long is thick is my hair, but that I'm Anishinaabe, my ancestors are Anishinaabe, that's who I am as a human being, then that's how I look at myself. I look at myself like I'm an Anishinaabe person. And even when people come up to me and they say to me, well, but how much are you? And I say, how much Anishinaabe am I? Yeah, and yeah, I say, I'm completely Anishinaabe. Well, no, but like, how much are you? And I'm like, I am completely Anishinaabe. And then they keep pressing me, and I finally am like, do you want to know what my blood quantum is, what I'm enrolled as? Because that's a different question than asking me how much Anishinaabe I am. Because when I know that my ancestors and all whatever is around me looks at me, they don't look at me as being a quarter, a half, 7/16, whatever. They look at me as like, they see me. And so I think being able to step into who we are as Anishinaabe people, or Dakota, or whoever you are, is a different way than thinking of ourselves than being Indian. And that's a big part of stepping away from who we're told we are versus like who we are in our heart. Like, I know now I'm 44 now, which is crazy, but now I feel completely comfortable in who I am. And I never felt like that as a young person. I was so unsettled and so uncomfortable, and I felt like I was always going into places and like, I don't know if I should be here. I don't know if I'm enough of this to be here. And never feeling like I fit anywhere, because I'm like the smart Native kid who like gets good grades, and like, where the heck does that kid fit? And I think now there's this great like nerdy natives kind of movement where people are like, there's all these great, amazing, educated Native people. And I think that that's really helped. I love seeing like those people like in their 30s and younger doing like, just being like, this is who we are. And so yeah, I have so many thoughts about this, but the main thing I think is just like, is thinking of ourselves as who our ancestors would think of us as being. And how would they see us? And how does, like, however you think of it, like you think of spirits or however you think of it, how do they think of us? They don't look at your blood quantum. Like, they're not looking at that. They're like, how you put out your tobacco and you tell them your name, like, they're like, all right, good enough for me. So yeah, that's really changed a lot of how I think about myself.
I love that. I love that so much because it's something that so many of our students feel. Like, specifically Anoka-Hennepin, we're this northern suburb of the cities. We're pretty far from any community in Minnesota, like native community in Minnesota, unless you're counting like the urban community, right? And a lot of students will say that they don't feel like they're enough. They don't feel like they belong, even in Indian education, right? To be part of our program, they feel like they don't have a voice, or they don't belong because they look like me, or they look like you, or they look blonde hair, blue eye, like, or sometimes they like are not, like they don't know their blood quantum or anything like that. And so they are really feeling not enough.
Well, and I guess there's another part of that that I feel like is really important, in that part of not feeling like enough, and that anger and that grief and that sadness we feel is not, it's partly about like all those things about skin color and blood quantum, but it's also the biggest secret I feel like we have, like, as for, and I'm gonna speak as an Anishinaabe person, is like the biggest secret we have is that everybody feels like they're not enough in some way. Whether that's they don't know the language, they don't know their ceremonies, they don't know how to go harvest rice, they never went, whatever it is, everyone feels like that. And it's a big secret. And it's embarrassing to admit it. It's shameful to admit that, like, I don't know how to talk in my own language. That's shameful, but it's not our shame to carry. Like, that's not our, we didn't do that. And so I think that when we can understand what happened and how we got to this point, then we can say, okay, that all happened. Those things are all there. This is why this is here, and this grief and this sadness, and this really for me was anger. This anger I feel, because your cat,
I'm sorry,
is about loss. And knowing that people of all different skin tones and all different blood quantums feel that loss, but just in different kinds of ways. And I think it's those are tricky conversations to try to have with people, but I think the more comfortable that I become in myself, the more people have those conversations with me. And I think that the whole thing about being where you are, like going back home, is really important, but also not only going back home, but also knowing that where you are, that's the land you belong to too. You know, not the rest is not the only Indigenous homeland. That's what we got to keep. And even that we don't really have. And so, like, if you're an Indigenous person and you're on your ancestors' homeland, even if it's a city, that's still your ancestors' homeland. So we got to like take a step back and like think about some of that stuff. It's like, oh yeah, Duluth, that's my ancestors' homeland. So I'm living in Hillside in Duluth. My ancestors lived there for thousands and thousands of years. So yeah, somebody got us, played a big giant trick on us. And we got to figure it out.
Yes. So I love how you've come to this place where you're just like, I'm Anishinaabe 100%, right? And that you haven't always felt that way. And then I heard you say that education played a role in that going to college, and was college the first time that you had classes where people actually talked about Anishinaabe people or Indigenous people? Or did you learn about some of that in middle school, high school?
So in middle school and high school, we had the Indian education room, right? Which is like the savior place of school, like the only place where you could feel comfortable, the only place where there was another Native person that I could connect to. And her name was Miss Jockala, and every time I see her, I always say, oh my gosh, Miss Jockala, I'm so glad that you were at our school. So she was there. But a lot of Indian education in my school was like, you get your notebooks, you got somewhere you can go get tutoring. And so they didn't really have the staffing or the funding to like teach, right? Like that wasn't really their role. And so it wasn't, and then I took Ojibwe with the college as a senior, like through like a video. Now that's normal, but that was not normal in 1994. And then, and that was really it. Like I never, ever had a Native teacher in my whole public school experience, except for one time there was a sub came in and his name was Mr. Blue. And I remember he came in and I was like, what is that guy doing here? Like long braid, like what the heck? It blew my mind that there could be a Native person that was a teacher, because I had never seen that. And then when I went to college, I had all these amazing professors. I had Dr. Paulus, Dr. Redhorse, all these super brilliant, super amazing, like incredible Indigenous teachers who would just tell it like it is. Talk about colonialism, and like I'd be like, what is happening? So part of like what's so powerful and important about going to college is the kind of teachers, the kind of classes, the kind of experiences you're going to have at college. You are not really going to get those in high school or middle school, because you can take a whole semester on decolonizing research or something. Like you just don't get that in high school, right? And so, and then having those relationships and like the Indian ed clubs or the Indian clubs that are in colleges are so cool. And you get to meet all these great Native people who are also super smart other Native people. And I think just that experience is so important. And which degree you get is pivotal about that part as the part of that experience and that connecting. So even if you're going to get your biology degree or you're going to get your English degree, you can still take those classes, still have that experience. And that transformed completely. I remember meeting Dr. Redhorse, and he had gotten his GED and he was a PhD. And I was like, say what? I was like, so you have a GED and you have a PhD and you're teaching me at college right now. I mean, it just blew my mind. Like I couldn't believe it. And so meeting those kinds of people like totally changed who I thought I could be. So, I mean, that's why you got to keep going. Like, that's why you got to go to college. It's like, go meet those people, hear what they have to say. It's just, if you can do PSEO, oh my gosh, I wish I would have done PSEO. Holy man, I could have got out of high school. It'd been great.
I love that you say that, because I push PSEO on my students all the time.
Because part of what's really hard about, like for me, junior and senior year, I needed to get out of there. The racial environment was so toxic in my high school. I went to Cloquet High School in town, super predominantly white school. I think there was 2 Native students in my grade, 1 African-American student, and that's it. Everybody else was white. And so the environment was so hostile and so difficult that if I could have went to college and met those people as an 11th or 12th grader, I mean, that would have been so amazing to know that there was like more to life than this like super hostile environment. And I had a really hard time in high school. High school was very difficult for me, whereas college was like, man, this is great. I love this. It's amazing. It was like the universe open, you know? I definitely and want my kids to do PSEO for sure.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about like your experience growing up in a school where you're like one of the few Native people in your class or in your school is not uncommon, right? A lot of our students feel like students are saying things about them or mocking their culture, or teachers don't understand, or there's these microaggressions. So like as a young Indigenous woman, like growing up in Cloquet, going to school in Cloquet, like how did you navigate that? Like how did you handle that when you came across microaggressions or people saying things? Like, what did you do with that?
I'm going to say I did not handle it in a way that I would advise. So I'm going to be real. I intimidated people. The way that I handled it was to make people scared enough of me that they would leave me alone. And, you know, whether that's people going, ooh, like yelling out their car window, or, and I think it's more common what you get is the really subtle microaggressions, the tone of the voice of the teacher, who gets disciplined more and who doesn't, right? Like all those things are so much more difficult to see when you're in it. And I, you know, partly I handle it by intimidating other kids, but being really smart and getting really good grades. I don't advise the intimidation part, but when I think that if I was to go back there now, I would still be the one who got all the A's and the exception, because the one thing about really low standards is it's really easy to like exceed those standards. So people are like, oh, you're so articulate. You're so smart. Like, well, yeah, why wouldn't I be smart, right? But I think that having and finding, you know, a friend, a family member a friend or family member who you can talk to, who you can connect to, who you can share your experiences, and they're going to be like, yep, that's real. I know that happened to you. I believe you that happened to you. Because part of what's hard is when no one sees it. And you're like, but this is real. And I went to my son's school and did a whole month long of classes. And I would sit there with him after and debrief and be like, this is like a chess game. And you see all these things that are happening. You see how this teacher talks to that group of white students who are loud and disrespectful. And it's like, oh, guys, calm down. And you see how she turns, and then there's a group of Native students, and it's like, you guys need to listen. We have to know that is racism. We have to know that that's what that is. And that's really hard when you're in it to see it. You know, like that's really, really hard when you're a kid. You don't know. That's why they're talking to me like this. And I think having somebody who you can check in with, someone who you can talk to and say, this is what's happening, this is real. And an adult who can advocate for you. Because like at my son's school, this kid called him a savage. I was like, say what now? We spun around, went back into school, and I'm like, I need to know who this kid is. I need to talk to the principal. I need to talk to the teacher. I need to talk to all these people, because this ain't going down again. And we did like a whole bunch of presentations about the word savage and where that comes from and why it's not acceptable. And I think like it's really hard, especially when like someone from my son, like he wants to have friends, he wants to fit in. And I told him, you know, he's in 8th grade, and you know, kids are getting popular. There's popular kids, there's not popular kids. And I told him, I said, you're not going to want to hear this, but you're not in their popularity game. And as difficult as that is to hear, you're not even in it. You can try to be the funniest, best, you know, best athlete, everything. You're not in it. And if we can see the game for what it is that you're there to learn, find someone you can trust and connect to, and try to figure out about who you are and how you got here. And know that this is not the best part of your life. Not by a long shot. And if anybody tells you that, they are lying. That life is going to get better. You're going to go to college. You're going to get to pick your friends, pick your community, pick who you get to be around. And it's going to get so much better. And then I know that this part is hard. And just try to find someone to connect to. You know, you don't got to play their game. Like, let them do their weird popularity thing they're doing. You do you, and you just keep going, push through.
I love that. I love what you're saying. Like when you're faced with those things, like you do you. and talk about it, right? Don't just be holding things inside. Don't just be keeping it to yourself. Like find a friend, find a person, somebody that you trust that you can process with,
Mm-hmm.
so that you're not just holding it in, so you can let it go. And then I also love what you said about like a lot of times when we're in middle school or we're in high school, like that is our world. And that is the world at that time, and we don't see anything beyond that. And so to remind your kids, to remind all students that like this is a stepping stone, right? Like this is not the end all be all, right? High school is not the best time of your life. Like there's so much more. Like you said, I went to college and I found out there's a whole universe out there. I love that. Can you talk a little bit about, you said that like now, today, you're doing art as your job and that's your life and you're loving it, but that's not what you saw yourself doing. You never dreamed that this is what you would be doing. Can you talk about like, were you into art when you were younger? Like, what did you think you would be doing if not what you're doing now? Excuse me.
I thought that I might be a lawyer because I like to argue, and I was often told that I should be a lawyer. And I really wanted to do something that would transform my community. I wanted to do something that meant something, that had an impact, that was going to make a difference later. And I wanted to go to law school. And then I was in college, and I didn't do art. I always found art to be so frustrating because the kind of art that I tried in school was like, let me draw this like whale, and I like can't draw the whale. You know, I can't draw a hand. And it's like being able to see that art is, there's so many different ways to do art, endless possibilities, and we don't have to fit into anybody's box with art. Like you can do art in all different kinds of ways. But I think I started working after college with youth and doing anti-racism work, and was like, I think I like bending the rules more than I like following the rules. So I decided not to go to law school because I don't think that was the right fit for me. But I loved working with youth, and then we would do all kinds of cool projects together. And I was like, I really love like having a powwow club and doing this kind of work that kind of led into art. It was like, oh, sewing is art. And starting to see that like I really have that creativity that I didn't, if someone just says to me, draw this whale, that doesn't let me be creative. And you know, everyone has their own way of being and their own gifts. And I think that when you're doing something and you try lots of different things and you're doing something and it just feels right, like you gotta listen to that part of yourself. You know, like that doesn't mean it's gonna be easy though, because I pushed through, I spent hours figuring out stuff that is super frustrating. But when I'm doing it, it feels right. Like I know in myself that this is what I should be doing. I gotta listen to that. And so, you know, I don't draw hands. That's not what I do. I don't draw whales. That's not what I do. But I get to do all kinds of art. And so I think it was partly like listening to myself and then I wanted to start dancing when I was like 23. And my brother was like, well, I guess you better learn how to sew and bead then. And I was like, yeah. And so he helped me, you know, and my mom helped me, and I had lots of great teachers. And my experience with cultural art, like as an Anishinaabe person, is that when I want to know how to do something and I ask people who know, they're like overwhelmingly willing to teach me, like super want me to know. So glad that a young person wants to know this stuff. And even if I ran into like 1 out of 10 people who didn't want to share with me, like that's fine. Not everybody's a good teacher, and that's okay. But I've had teachers who, I mean, would just stop what they're doing and pull moccasin apart and show me how to put it back together, and just gift me that over and over. And so that's what I do, is I try to give that gift to other people. because cultural arts are not like a secret, you know, like these are ours. And I started to see like, oh, these people gave me this gift and taught me these things because they were given it as a gift. Now I have to learn how to give this gift so that we can all see that this is who we are. This is what we've inherited. Like, we're not going to inherit like a cabin or like a mansion or something, but we have so much of our culture is still here. So much of who we are is still here. And I didn't know that as a young person.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what was there. And now I'm like, I just feel like I'm just barely know like a teensy tiny bit of it. And so that's kind of how I started, was just really wanting to be able to go to dance at powwows and just starting there. And it turned into something so much more.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about two things. Like, one is when you started sort of your art journey with like working with kids, but also wanting to be a dancer yourself and realizing like, I'm going to have to design my own dance outfit and put it, like sew it myself. Right. So when did you move from like, I'm just doing this thing because I enjoy it and I want this outfit for myself, to I really love this thing. I think this could be like my way of life, you know, like this could be a job, right? Like, how did you go from I love this thing that I'm doing to I can make this what helps sustain me and my family type of thing?
I don't think that I really believed it would for a long time, because I hadn't really seen a lot of people. I know a lot of artists, and if you're around a lot of Native people, there's a lot of Native artists. There's not a lot of Native business people though. That's pretty rare. And so most of the artists I know, they just do it either for their family or to make a little bit of extra money, and like trying to hustle like this little bit of extra money. And so that's how I started, was I just wanted to make some extra money when my kids were little. So I'd make like earrings or whatever and sell them to people, or moccasins for people. And was a lot of work, and I didn't make very much money, but it helped. And then I was like, oh, like so many people wanted them. There was more than what I could make. I could have just sat there forever and I would never made enough stuff. And I realized that people needed to know how to do this stuff. And teaches better than making in a lot of ways. So then I get to do both, and that is really great. But I didn't really believe that I could do art as a job until I started working with Louis Gong at 8th Generation. Because and you guys could look him up on Instagram, whatever, but he would be making like painting these like skate parks with like youth programs. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Like, I want to do like cool youth cultural art business stuff. And I'd never seen that, like all those things kind of connected. And when he contacted me and was like, hey, I'm looking for someone that does florals, because Ojibwe florals is kind of like what I'm known to do. I was like, oh my gosh. Like if you imagine whoever you admire the most, like whoever it is, actor, athlete, musician, whatever, and they like sent you like a Facebook message and was like, hey, you want to work with me? Like, all casual. Like, oh, sure.
No big deal.
Yeah. Like, I suppose at the time.
If you insist.
So I was just so excited to try to do something different. And even working with him, it was like, he kept reminding me, like, you got to keep learning. You got to keep pushing yourself. Don't get stuck in a rut. You got kept pushing me to think bigger and long term. And like, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? And I was like, I don't know. No, I don't know how to think about the next 10 years. Like, I don't know. I'll be here like hustling, I guess. I have no idea. And so like thinking long term was really something that I had to start doing, and thinking about like saving money, you know, stuff like that I had never done. Because if I had $100, oh, we are going somewhere. Like, what are we doing? Are we going to Target? Where are we going? And it's like changing that way of thinking of like, if I have $100, now I'm gonna like buy some stuff for my business, which is like different.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that doing that, and then so now I've been doing like the cultural art, like as a business for probably about 13 years, but I've been doing Heartberry for 6 years.
Mhm.
And now that I'm in like probably like 3 years into it, I was like, oh, I took my family on a real vacation. Like, and not where we knew somebody, not we were visiting somebody, we didn't know anybody, and we went to a beach. Yeah, we did. We had guacamole and we are on a beach and it was amazing. And I was like, I did this with my art job. Like, that's crazy. And that experience of having like that real vacation was like the first time I'd ever had that in my life. Like, I didn't grow up going to Mexico for a spring break. Like, who does that? So that was like, it's real. It's a real thing. You could really do that. It's shocking. I know.
I love it. So you're 6 years into Heartberry, which is like, can you talk a little bit more like, so before you were sort of, I'm going to assume like a consultant, like people would hire you to teach some classes and you'd be doing that with different groups. But now you have Heartberry where you design, that scarf is yours, right? I know those earrings are yours. Like you design these beautiful things that you're wearing, that I got some earrings, I don't have them in, but that people are buying and wearing and you can order. And how, like, does that still seem surreal? Like, you're 6 years in, does it still feel like I'm really doing this? Or
it feels really weird. So I kind of transitioned within that 6 years from doing not only like beadwork and teaching, but to start doing graphic design and digital art. So learning how to draw on a computer, use the Adobe programs, because there not a lot of Native people, not a lot of Native artists are using those programs. And for younger people, doing those things is like nothing. Like, most of your students could probably jump on Illustrator, boom, 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 do it, no problem. And having those skills that not a lot of other Native people have is super important, because then people want to hire me to do that stuff. And then I get to design my own line. So I started thinking about, like, if I could have a scarf, what would I want on it? Like, if I could just make it myself. And so, like, taking my beadwork designs and like jingle dress designs and the animals and like turning those into products that normally we just only have like Pendleton, like geometric, diamondy type designs, instead of like stuff that looks like us. And so now I like try to, when I get to design things like wool blankets and towels and all this super cool stuff, I just think like, what would I want to have? Like, what would I wish existed? And I kind of do that in life in general. Like, what do I wish existed? And I'm going to make that thing exist. And so it's partly coming from those cultural art, those designs and those beadworks and the shapes and the quill designs. And then where does all that come in, drawing all those? And then there's like the whole manufacturing piece of it. It's like working with manufacturers and screen printers. But I love like people and relationships and stuff. And so I like love that kind of part of working with other people. But I think like having your own business, your own website, your own skills that not everybody else has makes it so I can do this as a job. Like, because I have a website, because I do my own graphics, because I do all that myself, that makes it so that I can do it. So I don't just have to go to somebody else and have them do it. And then I actually can like pay my bills with it. So that was part though of like constantly learning and just keep on learning how to do metadata, how to do, you know, like what makes a good photograph? You know, why do you look at some images and you're like, and then other things you're like, meh. You know, what are those things? And learning about all that stuff all the time. And how do you engage people on Instagram? And these are things that young people are really good at. And so I think like, I love seeing the kind of things that it took me a long time to do. I think a lot of your students could probably do it in like 10 minutes.
This is true.
So yeah,
So
living in the digital world.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
How did you make that switch from like, I'm doing this as a consultant and now like, oh, I can like you said, if I want a scarf, what do I want that to look like? And how am I going to make that become a thing if I'm not going to sew it myself, right? Like when or how did you decide like, this is the direction I'm going to take it?
Well, so eighth generation, really, that's where they were going. They wanted to make wool blankets, but we started with earrings, I think is what we started with. And earrings was a natural thing for me because I'd already been making beading earrings. So I was like, oh yeah, I can think about an earring and like what I would want on an Ojibwe designed earring. And part of what was weird about it was like, I love to see people wearing my stuff. And I thought, oh, it's not going to be as cool if it's like manufactured, but that was wrong. Because what's cooler is then thousands of people can have it. They can all have a bag that has an Ojibwe design on it. They can all have socks with Ojibwe designs on it. Everybody can have it, not just who I have time to make one for. Mm-hmm. And that was part of what helped me like try and transition that. So, and then, you know, doing the piece of like drawing it, getting like the digital files, being able to connect with, like if I'm going to do like, say a screen printing, like for a shirt, this is something like everybody could do, but doing that drawing myself, turning it into a vector myself, having the right kind of file. And if I don't know how to do something, I watch YouTube tutorials. YouTube is the way to do it. So getting all those things the way you want them, and then talking to a screen printer. Like if you have a friend who does it, or if you can go to a shop and talking to them about how does screen printing work, so that you can understand how your design is going to work with the screen printer. Because you might have an idea and that's just not realistic. Like if you make a design that has 10 colors, a screen printer is like, that's going to cost you $6 billion because each screen is a different color. And so you start learning about like, oh, so how could I do this in a way that would make this work? Or like, and then what are fabrics that I like, and getting like samples of fabrics. And making a shirt is something that like I think is a kind of a cool, good way for a young person to start if they want to do like an arts business, is make a design, make it a vector, meet a screen printer, talk to them about how it works so you can understand it and get something made. It would be super fun. That would be cool. But that's kind of like the process of, and it has to be different with every single product, right? Mm-hmm. And eighth generation does a lot of like the manufacturing stuff with like the blankets, because that's a whole nother thing. But it's super interesting and fascinating. It's not boring.
I bet.
And it's always learning. Like I'm like, what? Because then you get these shirts and then you're like, oh, we got to take some cool pictures. So then you're like, let me find some models. Where do I want to do that? What do I want them to look like? What do I want the background to be like? You know, like you start getting, there's so much in it that you get to be creative of like, do I want to have these models on a beach or in the woods, or where, you know, how do I want to like represent myself? So I love that part.
I love that.
I could talk forever.
I know, it's so awesome. And I love like, it sounds like, I feel like a lot of students often feel like they have to do things by themselves, right? I feel like a lot of people feel like I got to take my idea and I'm sort of like, it's going to be me and I'm going to do it. And like, I'm hearing from you, like you did a lot of networking, you did a lot of introducing yourself to people, meeting people, taking advantage of opportunities. When your idol reached out to you on Facebook, all casual, you were like, yes, let's do it. So
yeah, I mean, 90% of like business is relationships. Mm-hmm. It's relationships. Like knowing people knowing who you are, people knowing that you're a person who follows through, you're a person of integrity, you're going to do what you say you're going to do. And like, honestly, it's like some of like just me being like nice to people, you know, like saying hello to people, but like having relationships in the community, people knowing who you are, meeting people, always talking to people, And that's like a big part of business is relationships. Like that, I can't overstate how important relationships are, which I love. And it's so funny because, like, you know, Ojibwe is like a relational language. Like everything in our language is like he to her, or me to you, or me to them, or me to all of us. And when I think about that, like why I'm so obsessed with relationships is like, that's like who we are. It's like everything's about like the relationship, like this like back and forth between all of us. So I love the relationship part, which is why COVID sucks.
Oh my gosh, yes. So how, you mentioned you have kids, and I know you told me before this, like you guys are homeschooling. But during this time, what have you guys been doing to like take care of yourselves? Right? Like this is a stressful time. It was stressful in March. It's been stressful. School is starting up again. A lot of different families are making different decisions. Like in our program, we have students that are staying home and distance learning. We have some students that are doing hybrid and going into the buildings and are home on different days. Some families have pulled and are doing homeschooling with their kids. But there's a lot of stress and anxiety and fear in the world right now related to COVID and related to just everything, lots of different things going on. So what is your family doing? What do you do to take care of yourselves? What do your kids do to take care of themselves?
A big part of what we do is we go outside. I feel like the being outside is really important for us on all levels: physical, mental, spiritual. Being outside in the woods and moving around, or going to a park and moving around. Your body needs to move. You need to feel the sun. You need to feel the air. And I know when I feel like yucky, that's like I haven't been outside enough. And it's hard when you're in a funk to go out there. But even if you just go for a walk, or, you know, take your dog for a walk, or your little cousin out for a walk, or whatever, we spend a lot. We go outside, we go hiking, biking, playing something outside every single day. Like there is never a day where we don't do that. And I feel like that's a really important part of maintaining our health on all fronts. And you know, putting on our tobacco, asking for help, smudging when we feel like we're not doing good. All those things are really important, and it's easy to freeze in place and I'm just going to zone out and like watch TV, watch Netflix forever when you feel stressed, but you're still holding that in yourself. And so for me, like I take my kids hiking all the time, is like walking all that off, walking that out, because I know that I'm teaching my kids how to cope, and I need to teach them a better way to cope than the ways that I have seen in my life, you know. Whether that's using or whatever it is. Like we need to and practice the ways that feel good to you. If you journal and you're like, oh, so much better, then you just gotta do that. Get that on the paper so you can get it out of yourself, right? If you put the salmon down and you feel better, do that. Whatever it is that makes you feel better, I think is the thing. It's like that thing again, like listening to yourself, you know, listening to your intuition.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's an extremely stressful period of time. But it's funny, is like, I often think about our ancestors and all the things that they went through. They went through things like this. And in fact, they went through much, much harder things than this. I mean, millions of people dying, their children taken away. I mean, I can't imagine what things were like during like the flu pandemic. And so knowing that they survived that. And so though this is super hard for me, I always look back at them and say, okay, they made it through this. I can get through this. Just got to stay steady, one day at a time, and just keep taking care of myself, keep taking care of the kids, and just take a deep breath, because our grandmas did it and we can do it too. And someday people are going to look back at us and be like, whoa,
they did it.
Yep. 2020, they survived. Maybe 2021 too. I don't know.
Oh.
Not sure. I'm not sure yet.
So you can correct me if I'm wrong. I wish I would have like maybe Googled this ahead of time, but you were talking about like being outside and getting your body moving is something really important, and that is what is helping. One of the ways that your family is taking care of themselves. But also, were you one of the founders of QuayPack?
Yeah.
Do
So
you want to talk about that a little bit?
QuayPack is an Indigenous women's running group, and we've been running together for 8 years now. And we do everything from like couple miles to women who've done 100-mile like trail races. And I never knew runners growing up. Like I didn't, unless you're like running from the cops or whatever. So running from a bear, I don't know. But so I maybe knew like 2 runners, but I had gone to, the community has like 5Ks here and there, like for different stuff, and went to one. And there was another woman there, her name was Charlie, and she was like all geared up in running clothes and stuff. And I was like, ooh, wow, like girl on the res with running clothes, like what's happening here? And she was like, you should do grandma's half marathon with me. And I was like, no. But she planted this seed in my mind of like, she thought I should do that. That's kind of weird. And so we started running together, and then we were like, I really love running with other Native women. Like, this is super cool. And I started inviting more women and more women and more women. And they have really pushed like me to do stuff like that I never in a million years thought I would do. Like I would never think. We've done together like 50K, which is 31 miles in the woods. Like who the heck would ever think you would do something like that? It's insane. But like, I think that's the power of community. And for me has created like a whole group of super amazing friends too. Like really great, powerful, positive Native women for me to be in a relationship to. And that's something I always wanted and I never really had. Was like, oh, these women are all like successful. They all like have like super cool, interesting jobs. They're moms, and like they are Native women who like to run, which is like crazy. So, yeah, we still run, and we haven't been running. Now we've kind of been doing more like pairs just to try to be safe during this. But I can't wait to run the big giant group with all of them again.
That's awesome. Have you always been a runner or no? So when did you start running? Why did you start running?
So in high school, I probably would have been the one smoking under the bleachers. I don't know if you want to cut that. Maybe not. I don't know. You do whatever you think. But and then as an adult, I was probably 200 pounds like most of my adult life. But I had a daughter who passed away. And after that, I was like through my grieving process and wanted to have another baby and just wanted to be healthier. And so I decided like, I want to just like lose a little bit of weight. And so I changed the way I ate and I started walking. And I was probably about 30 at that time, 30 years old. So I started running as a 31-year-old. So it's never too late. I was never an athlete, like ever. Never in any sports. Like it was like 31 years old, became an ultra runner.
I love that.
And now though, I'm like, I'll do anything. I'll try any sport. Like I just started playing tennis this week. Because why not? Why not just suck at something? And who cares? It's fun. I laugh the whole time I'm doing it. And I wish when I was a young person, I had just tried a bunch of stuff and just let myself just be bad at it until I found something I loved. Because like running, I'm not a fast runner, but I can run for a really long time, slowly. So it's like, I wish I would have tried that when I was younger. I could have been running all these years. So try stuff. Be willing to suck at stuff. Like, who cares? You suck at it. It's like, just laugh at yourself.
Yes. I need to hear that. I'm sure the students need to hear that, but I need to hear that. I know we often like, especially like in schools, right? Because we're always like shooting for the A, right? Like we're always shooting for the top score to be the best, like all of those things. And so I think that it is really important to like let yourself do things because you enjoy it, right? Like you don't have to be the best. Let yourself suck. And if you enjoy it, then keep doing it, right? I love it. And I mean, I tell my students all the time, like, I look like I'm in shape. I am not in shape. And so to hear that you started running, did you say 31?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that you started running at 31, like, that's motivation for me. Like, I need to get out there and run.
And runners look all different kinds of ways, right? Like, I think we have this image of runners that they're like super lean, and they're not always look like that. You know, I'm 5'3", like I'm like a strong person. So I have like short, stubby Ojibwe legs. Like but I can like shuffle my way, you know, through there. And so like, you don't have to be a tall, skinny person to be a runner. You just got to get out there, you know?
Mm-hmm. Two more things that I wanted to ask you. And one would be like, what advice would you give to Native youth today? Like our itty bitty little people, our elementary babies, our middle school, you have middle school kids. Are both your kids in middle school? Yeah. And then high school kids, like what advice would you give to our Native youth today?
Oh my goodness. Take a deep breath. Always make sure you're breathing. Try to connect to somebody, whether that's a family member, teacher, friend. Always remember that you're not alone, even when you're alone. Like, you're always surrounded by your ancestors, by whoever helps you. I have to think, how did I survive half the stuff that I got myself into? I must have survived it somehow. So you're not alone, and so much of the rest of your life is ahead of you. Like, things are going to get better every decade that you continue to work towards your goals. Things are going to get better and better and better all the time. I'm always amazed at how much better my life gets. You can survive any situation, extremely hard situations you can survive. You can't control any of it. The only thing you can control is how you respond. So I had a daughter who passed away, and I remember having this moment. I can either drown in this, or I can decide to have this mean something. And so that's part of how the Clay Pack really came about, was like, I have to decide to live. And so you can really take any situation in your life, no matter how hard it is, and say, how am I going to respond to this? What am I going to do with this? And that's really is going to build in you like strength that you never thought you had. And what sucks about strength, and this sucks, and I'm going to be real, you only get strong by surviving hard stuff. After this COVID thing, we're all going to be stronger. We're all going to have more patience. That's real. That's unfortunately how this works. And so if you had a hard childhood, you can be stronger than people who didn't, which is crazy. But if I look at the people I admire, they all survived so many hard things. And so you can too. And you can control your response. That sucks. It's not fair. Totally true. But your life is going to continue to get better.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's a big question, but I guess that's where I would start. And then to remember to connect back to, try to ask and learn about things about your ancestors, because that's going to help you really see yourself, how you got to where you are.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of another question I wanted to ask you earlier, because you were talking about how, like, growing up, like, you were 16 the first time you went to a powwow, and you were like, I want to be in this. And you talked about how you were around culture, but you weren't really like engaging, right? So how did you start engaging? Like, for our students who, like, there is that fear when you've never been to a ceremony before, when you've never been to a powwow before, you've never danced before. There's a fear, there's hesitation, there's feelings of not being enough, and can you really go there? Can you really do it? Like, how did you do that? Or how would you guide some, like, if somebody asked you, like, how did you do that? Sorry.
I would, if it's possible to find somebody who can kind of guide you, that's great and that's nice, but not everybody's going to be able to find that. But also know that you might have to try a couple different people to find somebody who's open to that. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid of rejection, because that's just that person doing what they do. And so, keep asking around for what you want. Ask people, can you show me this? Can you show me how to do this? You'll find somebody that will show you how to dance or how to sew or whatever. And the other part is like, put out your tobacco or whatever and ask everything that's around you to help you too. Mm-hmm. And then I like to watch. So like, if I'm at a powwow, let's just use an example. I watch, like, what are all the people around me doing? What are these women doing? How are they interacting? How are they dancing during this part? How are they doing this during that part? And kind of paying attention. Because then I see like, oh, that's what's kind of expected of me during this. And I've been reprimanded for stuff that I did wrong. That's just part of what them aunties do. Like, it's hard, but that's how it is, So if you just get out there, when you ask the universe to give you some stuff, they're going to probably like let you in. That just is how it works, but you have to do it. You have to seek it. It's not going to just like come to you. And so once you start seeking it, the door will open and you'll find your way in there. You just got to do it.
Thank you. The last question that we wanted to ask was, and you talked about this a lot earlier, but if someone were to ask you, like, I want to make sure I ask it right. Okay. What does being Native mean to you? What does being Native mean to you?
I look at being Native as more of this broader political identity that we all have as Indigenous people. And I probably use the word Indigenous more than I do Native. And so that's like this broad identity that everyone in like, that's from this hemisphere, right, has, who are Indigenous to this hemisphere. To me though, under that is, to me, being Anishinaabe. So I look at myself as an Anishinaabe person. That's how I see myself. That's how our ancestors identified themselves. And so that means our language, our ceremonies, our way of life, whether it's I'm going wild racing or I'm laughing and joking with my family, if it's the way that we have that humor that nobody else has, all those different ways of being, that's being Anishinaabe. Being Native for me more is like a broader like political identity, which I think is super important. And that connection we all have as Indigenous people, that's super important, but that's like a layer to me in addition to being an Anishinaabe person, And so like being a mom and being a woman and being all this are these like layers of how I see myself. But to me, to feel rooted, I needed to know who I was as an Anishinaabe person. But it kind of started with me figuring out who I was as a Native person. It started with like this political identity, with understanding racism and understanding history and colonialism. But then it was like, all that happened. And then like, what's under that? So they're both important. But I think letting them lead those identities lead you into your other identities is really powerful too.
Thank you.
But that's where I'm at today. I don't know, to ask me 10 years and I might have a totally different answer.
I'll come back in 10 years, I'll ask you. So that's kind of like all the questions we have. So I just want to like, again, say miigwech, like, thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions, to talk to our students, to record this video for us. Is there anything else that you want to add?
Miigwech for asking me to be here. I just gave me a good reason to like, fix my hair and put on something besides sweatpants. So that's great. No, I'm super, I feel like it's shocking to me that I get to do this kind of stuff. So I guess I'm just grateful to be a part of this wild ride we're on.
Yeah,